what do you say to your students when they fail?
And mistakes are opportunities. So yeah, it's something that I think about when I think about my kids. I tell them you either win or you learn, but you never lose, right? It's always an opportunity to continue to get better, to build muscle memory, and to gain strength in a specific area.
Welcome to the RealPropPro podcast, where strategy, innovation, and wealth converge to redefine real estate investing.
Hello, and welcome back to the RealPropPro podcast. My name is Ian Dietler. I'm a Sacramento-based real estate investor who focuses on fix and flips, joint venture partners, and working with various different types of investors. This podcast is where new investors come to build mindset, strategy, and momentum. This podcast is powered by RealPropPro, your go-to platform for real estate investor training, tools, and support. At RealPropPro, we help everyday people become confident, capable real estate investors. Whether you're brand new or trying to scale your current real estate investment business, we teach strategies that work in real markets like wholesaling, fix and flips, tax deed, tax lien investing, land flipping, multifamily, creative financing such as lease options, sub 2, seller financing, wraps, all of this and more. And we don't just teach it, we equip you with the software, mentorship, and step-by-step guidance so you can start doing real deals. If you'd like to learn more, please visit www.realproppro.com to get free resources, learn about live events, and see how to start building your real estate investment business. That's realproppro.com. Now that brings us to today's guest. I'm so happy to have him on. His name is Sam Dorvil, a certified real estate expert. Sam teaches investors how to flip homes, build spec houses, and develop small multifamily 2 to 4 unit projects. But more than that, he's a mentor, an entrepreneur, and a man of deep faith who's passionate about helping people create generational change. So without further ado, Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate you. Appreciate the introduction, and I can't wait to get going.
All right, sounds great. Before we dive in, can you tell our audience a little bit more about your story, where you're from, what challenges you've overcome, and how you got into real estate?
So my story is really complex, and what I typically tell people is, I'm not gonna take you down Sesame Street, but that's kind of how life dealt its hand to me. And you just got to play the cards that you're dealt. But a lot of it makes sense in what I'm doing as far as being a foster dad and being a adoptive dad. I wouldn't be in this area if I didn't have these prior experiences. But my story begins in the island of Haiti, right? So I was born in Haiti. My dad worked for the government at the time, and during that time it was a dictatorship, and there was a coup happening in the country. So the government was switching over, and what happens in a situation like that when it's called island justice, and they were killing people that were part of the former regime, and that involved, stuffing them in tires and burning people alive. So, I was really born into a challenging, challenging situation. And I mean, the one thing that um people know or don't know is your body keeps the score, right? So I don't know if you know of that book, but whatever's happening around you, you're kind of absorbing, all of that stuff. So that was happening during the time that I was born. I also did have a life-changing experience, and that kind of ties into, my faith. When I was 2, I was playing outside with this girl. I was in Haiti, and this girl pushes me into a pot of beans. It's like so my arm was burned and my chest was burned and the skin kind of fell down from my fingertips. And I was rushed to the hospital by, my godmother. My mom was in the US, working, trying to pave a way to pay for us to kind of get over there. And then my dad was working in a few towns over, so I didn't have my parents around. It was just like my godmother and one of my aunts. So they rushed me to one hospital, and there was no beds available, and they rushed me to a second hospital, and then there was no beds available, and my body went into shock, and I died in my godmother's arms. And she was just a prayer warrior. She just kept praying for me and praying for me and praying for me and praying for me. And at one point, someone said, hand over his body. And she was just like, no. And like, what am I going to tell his parents? Right. And she just kept praying for me. And God felt the need to, to bring me back. So I always feel the need to share that story for multiple reasons. One, sometimes you might think that you're operating on guaranteed time. For me, I don't have that luxury. So every minute, every breath, every second that I take, I know I need to be absolutely, intentional, which is a gift. I may have not seen it like that. So there's always a sense of urgency that I'm operating through. So from there, we got political asylum into the country, and we landed in the middle of the hood during the crack epidemic. So I grew up around some very challenging situations, challenging stuff, definitely a lot of poverty. But I think without those things, I wouldn't have a level of appreciation that I have now for, where I'm at, what I'm doing, the people around me. And I wouldn't have found my calling in foster care if I didn't grow up around the friends that I grew up in that were in group homes and foster care and stuff like that. So that's a little bit of background, about me. I could kind of go on and on about, what that looked like, but that just kind of just paints the picture of, how life started for me.
And how old were you, and where did you guys end up when you came to the United States?
So we landed in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I was close to 3, at that time.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
And have you lived in Florida the rest of your life, or where do you stay now?
For the most part, I lived in Florida for the majority of my life. I went away for 5 years. I ended up getting a football scholarship to the University of Connecticut, and I enjoyed my time there. That's where I met my wife, and we decided to move back down. Just tropical weather, the seasons, the sun, and kind of, and family. So I'm a big family guy.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing, those early upbringings and stuff like that, because it really is important for people to understand, like you said, tomorrow's not promised, and, we need to do the best we can to make the biggest impact on this earth as possible in what little time we do have.
For sure.
So I appreciate you sharing that with our audience here. Kind of switching gears into a little bit more like real estate and stuff. I want to see how you got into real estate, but I think we were discussing earlier that you got into general contracting, or you were a builder before you started investing. Can you kind of talk a little bit about how you got into those different fields?
All right. So the way that I got into real estate was, in a way, kind of like happenstance, but it was kind of the way it should have happened, or it needed to happen. My wife, I had pushed her to go to med school. She's very bright, very sharp. And I just felt like she wasn't living up to her potential. So I pushed her to go to med school. And one of the things that was attached to that is you get into med school, we'll get engaged, right? And that's what happened. And she was supposed to go to med school in the islands of Anguilla. And then from there, she would have did residency in like Chicago. At the time, I had a body shop and a car dealership with my brother, and I was going to be kind of funding that endeavor. But right before she went, she wrote me a letter, and she said she didn't want to go. She didn't foresee us having the family system that, we kind of envisioned happening. And, I'm not gonna lie, I was crushed. I was crushed because, I have this, thought in my head that we're gonna be, a power couple, and we're gonna do a bunch of different things. And, the plan just kind of changed on me. But what happened right after that was I said, all right, so if you're gonna stay, what we're gonna do? She said, how about we look into real estate? And then she handed me the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and it was part of a whole thing that she had. So after I read the book, it really kind of spoke to me. And then there was a seminar she had already purchased, and we went to that seminar, together. And and then it took me one more seminar, which was like Fortune Builders seminar, and we just kind of hatched a plan and said, you'll get your license, you'll be the realtor, and then I'll start investing and flipping, and then we'll kind of go from there. And for me, because I was in the car game for several years at that time, essentially it's the same, right? We buy a house, sometimes sight unseen, you don't fully know all of the issues, and then you make a quick assessment, you repair the things that you need to repair, and then you put it out, to get sold. And in real estate, it's obviously it's a higher caliber, higher price point, but the theory is the same. So, I didn't have much money, so I started, with bandit signs and a whole bunch of letters, yellow letters, driving for dollars. I really started hitting the pavement very hard. And I was really green as a real estate investor, but I had a friend that worked at the title company that I went to high school with, and he was going to be handling the contract and the title work. So I would call him, and I was like, what's the escrow? I didn't even know what an escrow was. And he was like, put this on the escrow line. All right. Or, or what should I do in this line? He'll tell me exactly. Make sure you initial each page. Make sure you sign this addendum. Make sure you X off this particular assign or not assign. So he kind of really helped me and gave me confidence to, put things under contract, even though when I didn't know what I was doing. And that's kind of how my, journey began. I did a deal. I think it was a wholesale deal, and it helped me pay for my wedding. I got back about it was like $9,000 is what I cleared, through that transaction. And then after that, I was hooked.
You and I were kind of talking a little bit earlier, and I had the same type of experience where, a wholesale deal kind of paid for our, me and my wife to get married as well. So it's funny that we kind of have that same similar story there, to where, just getting in real estate, we're trying this thing out, it works, and then after that, it's like, okay, well, we got some money to get married.
Let's keep making it work.
Yeah, so I just love that we have that parallel, because that's, it's just so interesting. Can you talk a little bit how you got into construction? Because I don't know if you still are, but weren't you a general contractor at some point?
Yeah, so I'm still in construction. I'm in a place where I'm trying to figure out exactly what I know exactly where I'm headed, with what I do in construction, but how I got into construction, which was an accident as well. Right. So on my first house flip, I just remember I hired a contractor. I fired a contractor. I hired a second contractor. I fired a second contractor. I hired a third contractor, and luckily, we were still profitable. I learned so much on that first transaction, and what it told me right away is this business has contractor problems, right? As you know, if you're an investor, you've been around fixing and flipping, or or had to deal with contractors and stuff like that, this industry has contractor problems. So, what I said to myself is, I don't know if I'll ever fully be happy with the level of execution, preparation, planning, etc. that, that I seen in those first few transactions with contractors that I was comfortable with. So I was just kind of like, I would just kind of take this on myself. And as I started taking on projects on my own, I made more relationships. I made mistakes. As a matter of fact, because I was green in that area as well, YouTube was my friend, right? So I would crack open that YouTube and I would see someone doing a project or a bathroom, or specifically a shower pan, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what is this supposed to look like? Because I don't want them to just hand me anything, right? I'm managing it, but I need to know that it's done right. So I'd crack open YouTube and kind of get the lesson there. And maybe in the early part, I would take it on myself so I know how it's done. And then from there, I determine if I ever want to do it again.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I got into I got into construction. So I started managing my own projects. So for 5 years, I managed all of my own projects. I got really good and really fast at, planning rehabs and getting in and out of rehabs. I'll have a whole house flipped in about 50 days.
Wow.
And then what happened from there was I had a capital partner that was my primary business partner for a very long time. He had a restaurant at the time, and then he was like relocating and stuff like that. So the market was changing a little bit as well. We weren't sure what was going to happen in the marketplace. Plus, I had this partner that was getting ready to move. So, I thought it was a great opportunity for me to pivot and then focus on construction full time. So then I launched my company, Custom Homes Building and Remodeling, where we focused on a lot of customization, custom home building, additions, full house guts, and stuff like that. So, yeah, that's how I got started in construction.
I know in California, accessory dwelling units are very big. Are those also big in the area that you're in? And is that something that your company does a lot of, is ADUs?
No, we actually don't. We don't see them that often. There's certain towns. There's a specific town called Hollywood where that was kind of already kind of baked in, where they had units, kind of ADUs, already, in the back of certain properties. But that's not as big. They're not as easy to build. They are more expensive because we use, CVS block. So the reality is most people don't want to spend what it's going to cost to actually get that cash flowing, asset. So,
Yeah, I mean, here in California, I'm in the Sacramento market. It's basically the only way to make anything make sense. I mean, I was talking
yeah,
to
but
another investor the other week that she takes a single family home and she'll turn like the garage or a master suite into a unit, and then she'll build a duplex off the back with just a little bit of yard space and like stack them up, and all of a sudden she just has 4 units out of this 1,100 square foot house, and then there's 4 units and they're
yeah,
renting for
exactly.
2,000 a piece. I'm like,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, that's one way to do it, but
that is one way to
other
do
than
it.
that,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
it's cash flowing in California for long-term rentals.
Uh-huh.
It's just not the way to go right now. So,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I was just wondering if it was the same in your market.
No, it's
Yeah.
not the same in our market. Yeah.
Now, what about ground-up construction and development? Now, do you do development? Do you take the raw land and get it through entitlements and all that? And if so, can you talk about that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, so one of the things, I'll just kind of go back a little bit. So, 2 years in, so the way I started my business, which was, through the flipping, but then when I started my business, I got 2 years into the business, and I quickly realized I had my best year, right? I think I probably had brought in at that time, 2 years into the business, I think I brought in like close to $500,000 in construction or something like that. I had a really big project, but at the end when I did all of my books, and then I just didn't have any money. So, I went through all of my books and went through all of my, what I paid the contractors, the subcontractors and everything like that. And then,
Which sounds like a headache.
yeah, yes. But I went through it, and what it told me was, one, it told me I wasn't charging enough, right? And then also two, I literally said to my wife, I was kind of like, I don't know if I'll ever be happy in this business, right? And what that made me do is I found this Facebook group, which was very talented, design, build, general contractors that really knew their stuff. And then I found my mentor in there. And once I found my mentor, I found a podcast which had a whole bunch of nuggets in there, and I devoured like 300, podcasts. Right. And in every
Wow.
podcast, I just adjusted my systems, because I was adjusting systems, but since I didn't come from the perspective of construction, it was going to take me forever to figure out all of the systems. So when I found my mentor and I went through all of these podcasts and all of them really helped me, I flew out to Phoenix, and I met him, and he dropped the biggest nugget on me. He didn't even know how big it was. He said to me, Sam, I don't sell a custom home. I don't sell a whole house renovation or a kitchen. I sell a system that gets you to that custom home, that gets you to that, da 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 da. I remember writing that down, right? And then I went back to my room and I told my wife, I was like, maybe I've been looking at this wrong the whole time, right? I was like, this is a system, right? So, I took my notes, and then met a bunch of people, and then after that, I reached out to him. I said, "Hey, listen, can I come shadow you?" Right? So at the time, he had a $10 million construction company. I had never been inside of somebody's machine, and he said yes. So for 3 days, I kind of shadowed him and kind of learned all of his systems, sat in every meeting, took a bunch of notes, and then I came back and I kind of dialed it in. And then from there, I had like a whole bunch of systems for, running and operating a construction business. Right. So I think your original questions was about, custom homes, entitlements and stuff like that. Right. So
Yeah, yeah.
that gave me the blueprint from a design build standpoint on how to take a client from concept to completion, right? So prior to that, I was operating as a contractor where, some clients may be like, oh, I want to buy the material. Sure, you can buy the material. Or I want to do this aspect and not this aspect. I go, sure. I was one of those contractors. But then once I got into design build, and I literally handled every aspect of the project, from the architect to the planning to the designer to the actual construction, permitting, etc. Then it made it easier for me to kind of launch projects.
And what about like development? How did you switch from building to development?
Okay, so I always wanted to be a developer, right? So when I was a house flipper, I reached out to there was a house that I bought, and I needed an engineering letter because prior to me buying it, a car had ran into the side of the house, and there was a structural integrity issue, right? And it wasn't closed out on the title work. And then, so I needed him to come back out. He issued a letter, and then I had always had the thought of being a developer. So I reached out to him a couple years later after I'd gotten started, and I had said to him, actually, no, I didn't get started. I reached out to him and I said, hey, listen, I came to his office. I was like, hey, I want to learn how to, build houses. I want to know how to develop, properties and stuff like that. And I was like, I will work for you for free, to do that. And he said, his response to me was, he's like, for free? He's like, you could pay me 30 grand and I'll show you everything you need to know. And he's like, as a matter of fact, 40 grand. Right. And then I'll show you. But the guy was such a jerk. Right. It wasn't like I wasn't dying to kind of learn anything from a development standpoint from him. Right. And so, and I kind of let that fall by the wayside. And then I had a friend from college that was a developer, massive developer out of Manhattan. And I flew into Manhattan one day to sit down with him and kind of talk. And I considered moving to Manhattan to learn from him, right? And what he was doing is he had done about $600 million worth of vertical construction, in Manhattan, and he had a couple of 100 million in the pipeline, and he really kind of told me everything he does and how he does it. And then but at the end of that meeting, I said I was going to need to learn it through construction. So then when I really started getting into design build, and I had all of the steps attached to building it, I got a funding partner to fund the transaction. And then the way it worked is I'll bring all of the sweat equity and the labor and the experience and every aspect of that. I created value there. And I just need you to just fund the transaction on the front side and then come to closing on the back side. So then that's kind of how, during my time as design build, I launched my first project, and that's kind of how I got into development.
It sounds like you're really good at networking and talking to people and creating like valuable connections in that regard. And also something that I like to talk about that you've just mentioned, I want to highlight is I like to tell people to like, how can you provide value to somebody? A lot of people are in just going through life, just like trying to find what's best for them and, what they can do for themselves. I think that's the totally wrong mindset to have. I think it's really important to always go around and figure out what kind of value you can provide to other people. And it sounds like you were trying to find ways that you could provide value to some very, pretty big players in the game. And so I encourage anyone who's like listening to this or trying to figure out how to kind of get started or how to, position themselves in this type of, real estate investment game. Just talk to people, meet people, and figure out what they need. Figure out how you can provide value. Maybe it's money, maybe it's time, maybe it's hard work, and just really get to know people, really get to know how people's systems work, exactly like what you were talking about. It's like it's so important to figure out what they need and then figure out how you can provide that need for them.
No, for sure. And when I missed this part. When I was a house flipper, this is kind of what I did too, right? I didn't have a lot of money. I started out as a wholesaler, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I created my value was, I just want you to come to the closing on the front side. I was going to handle every aspect of it, sweat equity, getting materials there, getting materials ordered, design, everything. I kind of handled all of those aspects then. So, for me, when I got into new development, it was the same thing. I add a significant amount of value, to, a client in dealing with me. I have all of the arms of the octopus, so to speak. And, I create my value there, right? Because obviously having contractors on a project is a challenging situation if you're an investor. And once you get that taste one time, you might not ever, want to, do it again. So, I bring value to the table for sure, all the time. That was always my goal.
Can you kind of talk about the mindset? I kind of heard you just speak on it just a little bit. In my experience, I see a lot of newer investors try out something, maybe it doesn't work. I think that wholesaling is a great place to start. It's somewhere where I've tried to, get into the game doing. I know a lot of people start there, but I will say it's a very difficult and, it's a difficult strategy to sustain, because you're just always having to constantly find more and more deals.
Uh-huh.
But can you talk a little bit about how important it is to have a strong mindset, a real estate investor mindset that that allows you to fight through any type of failures? So basically, like, what do you say to your students and stuff when they fail, right? Like, do you try to show them that's a learning lesson, or like how do you get them to learn from these mistakes?
I mean, mistakes are opportunities, right? So yeah, it's something that I think about when I think about my kids. I tell them you either win or you learn, but you never
Mm,
lose. It's always an opportunity to continue to get better, to build muscle memory, and to gain strength in a specific area. I think for me, I think it was 2020 when I made the decision to become a lifelong learner. I was learning so much, then, and I decided then to become a lifelong learner. So every everything has a learning element to it. So I consume a lot of books. I consume a lot of digital material. If I meet someone, I'm very inquisitive about what they do. I want to peel the onion back and really extract their knowledge and extract their experiences to help me kind of grow into the person that I'm looking to be. Especially for me, I tell you about my start in the level of poverty that I started in, and I want to move as far away from that. I relate to a bunch of people because my life experiences are quite wide ranging, but I want to also max out on what my potential is, right? So that's kind of some of the things that kind of motivate me. And as far as like mindset as well, when you've gone through significant amount of challenges, certain things just don't look as hard, right? So I'll give you an example, right? So people will always say to me, because I'm a active, foster dad, who they'll say, "Oh, I could never do that. I just want to keep them. I wouldn't be able to kind of, hand them back and stuff like that, right?" And although that is a challenge, it's a challenge for us. But for me, I could probably rip off 30 or 40, situations or circumstances that were significantly harder than that, right? So it brings things into perspective for me, right? And then also too, because I am a visionary, and I think that's a gift that, God has given me. Once you continue to put one step in front of the other, the thing finds a way of appearing and happening, right? And I love being able to create things and make things happen. So that's from a mindset standpoint is what motivates me. And for your students and the people listening to this podcast, the thing will happen for you once you put one foot in front of the other and you continue to kind of blaze your path. So
Yeah, thank you for sharing that advice. It's really really helpful to a lot of people, especially with how inspiring your story is and everything like that.
mhm.
What's the most important thing for a new or younger investor? What's the most important thing for them to know before getting into real estate investing, no matter how they decide to start?
I would say the most important thing is don't get stuck in the learning loop, right? Because that's what happens with a lot of new investors, right? They learn something and be like, I have it in my brain, it's in there, but it's about action, right? So for me, I like to put things that I learn into action right away, right? So, no matter what aspect of real estate that you are in and you are coming into, but putting things into action, into play right away is going to probably be the best thing that you can do. And I would say, don't don't keep learning. Just press play on the things that you do know, right? And then you'll see that they'll start to happen for you. So I would say that's probably the most important step. And that's kind of what I say to, my students as well. So don't get stuck on the learning, get stuck, doing the steps, right? So
Can you talk about how important a good mentor is? Because it sounds like you've had some really amazing mentors and people that you've learned off of. I know I've had some really great people in my life who have done a lot to help me, and they didn't have to, but they decided to because they saw that I was hungry and that I wanted to get into this, and that, you know, I was gonna make it happen no matter what. So can you talk about how important it is to have the good mentors, the right mentors, or just, having someone that knows the ropes in general? Can you just kind of talk about how important that is, especially for like a confidence level?
yeah, I think mentors are invaluable for a bunch of different reasons, right? One, they've already gone where you're looking to go, right? Then they it's almost like they provide a security blanket in the sense of the level of wisdom and experience that they've already seen, right? So even if you're exploring different thoughts that you have in your head, you're like, hey, this might work, this might do this, and this might that. But then I go, hey, let me just run it by my mentor, and then he'll pick it apart and he would like dismember it. And then he'd be like, you know what? I save some time here. I don't have to run down this alley, right? So there's a time saving aspect that's good as well. So there's the experience and wisdom, then there's a time saving aspect, and then you also have to look at too. Your mentors are generally more successful than you are in this particular space, right? So there's the saying, success leaves clues, right? And there's things that they've done right, and then there's things that they've done wrong as well, and you could benefit from both, right? So when you pick things apart on the things that did right, it helps your trajectory there. And then also too, a wise man learns from others' mistakes, right? What are the things that they did wrong as well that you do not have to fall into, right? So, if you put all of those, you sandwich all of those things together, I would say a mentor is invaluable for those reasons.
Great advice. You also have your own podcast. Can you talk a little bit about how that journey's going and what you're hoping to share through the platform?
Yeah. The so I run a podcast called the Pro Design Builder Podcast. It's multifaceted. All right. So we always start at your childhood, right? So kind of like how I shared, parts of my story there, and it's an entrepreneurship podcast. But then we also peel back the onion when it comes to life, when it comes to faith, and then we always end up in entrepreneurship, and how did some of these obstacles or challenges help you in your vision of building a business or in entrepreneurship, right? Because sometimes what happens is you go through some challenges in life, and one, you may not ever be heard or know where this burning desire comes from, or what these challenges have kind of done or helped or hurt you. But they all have a place. So, for me, it's kind of been a outlet to share these different parts of me, and also receive different people's perspectives and stories, and really kind of hone in on people's specialty, right? And I'm gaining wisdom and knowledge from whatever area that they specialize in, and then we always end with lessons learned, right? So there's always a lesson that was learned through life and in business, and that's helping them grow. So, it's multifaceted for sure.
That's great. It sounds like you're doing a lot to help a lot of different type of people with the podcast.
For sure, for sure. It's made to help with mental health, is made to help with challenges, is made to help with struggling in entrepreneurship, breaking into new arenas, going through challenges in business and in life and stuff like that. So it's really made to help a lot of people for sure.
Okay, talking about business challenges. Okay, what is the worst thing that's happened to you in real estate? What's something that was like, oh shit, why am I doing this? Or
Uh,
have you had that? Maybe you haven't. I don't know.
I
I'm
mean,
just wondering.
if you're in real estate, you have something, right? There's a 100% chance there. All right, I'll tell you. There's two stories, but this is a story. I'll just tell you this one, right? So, I was buying a house at auction, right? It's my second house that I bought at auction. The numbers look good. I think we paid about 609 or something like that, on it. The initial foreclosure amount was about 423. And then we ended up being the highest bidder. It was like 609. And then, once I won the bid, I went, paid for it, at the courthouse and stuff like that. But I knew I had gotten into the neighborhood and I knew that there was people full blown living in there, right? There were several cars in the driveway. They knew this auction was coming, and then they didn't make a way to leave. What happened was I sent them a letter to get like a writ of possession of the property, right? And the court was going to need to kind of get the sheriffs involved for me to really obtain the property after the auction. So I sent them this letter, had my contact information in there, and had a court date, in there as well. And I get a phone call from the owner of the house, and he said, hey, I got your letter. I want to meet you at the house and work this out amicably. Da 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 da. Right? I was like, okay, and it's an opportunity for me to see the asset that we purchased. We bought it sight unseen. We knew that it was in a gated community. It's a nice community. The price point of the homes were between like 850 and 950, right? So we bought it right, even if we needed 100 or change. I mean, they're living in the house, so all of those things kind of just made sense for us. So I was like, okay, all right, let me go check this house out amicably. And then the guy goes, he's like, hey, I'm gonna show you around the house. He's like, but you can't, I can't let you use your phone, right? I'm like, all right, alarm bells, right? He's like, so he shows me around the house, right? He shows me the house. The house looks good. The house doesn't need much work at all, actually, right? And then he proceeded to tell me how he's going to destroy the house if I don't give him, 30 grand so he can move out, right? And I heard desperation in his voice and the seriousness, and he was talking about getting a jackhammer and busting up all of the marble and putting a hole in the second floor and turning on the water, put a hole in every piece of drywall, rip out the cabinets and all of this stuff, right? Very,
Yeah,
very descriptive.
for our listeners, that can be done pretty quickly if someone's really going at it. So,
Correct.
I would probably take that as a pretty serious threat. So
No,
continue,
very, very
please.
serious threat. The fact that he's voicing this out loud, is alarming, and it's a threat. And it was very descriptive, very, alarming. And I was like, okay, let me talk to my business partner and let me just see, what we could come up with. And I initially had in the budget about $65,000 worth of rehab that I thought that it may need, just to kind of get it up to sellable condition, right? And when I looked at the numbers and I spoke to my business partner, I was like, hey, listen, how this was projecting, we had 65,000 to renovate this property. We're not going to need 65,000. We're probably only going to need 30. So this sucks, but we need to kind of get this guy out of here and preserve the investment, and then just write him a check for the 30 once he's out of here. All right. And we agreed to that, and we wrote him that check. Just want to reiterate this to you. What happened in this situation was extortion, right? Extortion is a federal crime, punishable probably by at least 5 years, right? So, you know what, that was a lesson learned as well, right? Because I spoke to an attorney right after that, and he was just kind of like, that's your house. I would have just whipped out that camera and just, it's no longer his, you know, it was your house. You should have whipped out that camera and you should have just been filming. I was like, but I don't want to fight the guy in the house, you know, during,
you don't know if he has weapons. I mean,
exactly. So, you know, so you have to put yourself. So the one thing I would have done differently, and I'll drop this nugget on you if you're ever in this situation, just put in the check line under duress, or, you know, something in the subject line that you wrote this check and it was under some sort of duress or something like that. So then now later you could come back and remedy that situation. So, so that was a situation that happened. We got we retained the property, you know, we did end up selling it. We made a profit. Yeah, and that's, that's one of my real estate stories.
Man, that's crazy. I mean, I'm so glad you guys were able to make profit out of it, but I mean, it seems like the whole situation was just like, ugh.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much for chatting with us today. Each week we do a free book giveaway to our listeners, and basically how that works, we have a couple books here, and we ask our listeners to like this episode and leave a comment on which book they'd like. So I'm going to show them here. So Sam, if you could let me know if there's any here that you like.
All right. What you got? Oh, 10x rule, profit. All right. The E-Myth, One Thing, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, you know, Cash Flow Quadrant. I mean, the two that I like the most, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and the 10x rule, is going to be my top two. And the One Thing is is good as well. So,
yeah,
if you are a new investor, Rich Dad, Poor Dad will just change your mindset completely. The 10x rule, if you're really trying to amp up, you know, and get to the next level, the 10x rule is amazing for that, for sure.
Yeah. Thanks for your input on those. Go ahead and like and comment there, and we usually pick a winner about 5 days after the air date. So go ahead and leave your comments below, and one lucky winner will send a book to your house. So now, again, thanks for coming on to the show. We really appreciate it. And before we leave, I want to talk a little bit about our conversation, kind of a little bit of a wrap up. If there's one thing we can take from Sam's story, is that you don't have to start perfect, but you do have to start. Sam built a life through grit, faith, and focus on helping others win. Whether you're flipping, building, or still learning, the right mindset, mentor, and belief in yourself is what's really important. So to all my listeners, keep showing up, stay grounded, and don't build houses, build a legacy. Thank you. Have a good one.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Sam.